Good morning. It is Friday, July the 21st, 2023. And even though it's July, it's not that warm here. We had a lovely cliff-top drum circle last night, but it was windy. Anyhow, I am reading out of Time Out of Mind. It is an autobiography of Joan Grant explaining her life, because after she published Winged Pharaoh and her other far memory books, she was questioned much by people about the nature of her books and how they came to be. And so in 1956 this was published. Joan Grant was a far memory writer, very intelligent woman, and she had a very interesting life, and I'm really looking forward to reading this. I've just finished Life as Carola, who was a tough read in some parts, much torture. Winged Pharaoh was amazing. I read that as well as Moses was born, which was the time before the flood. So it is interesting to me as well. I have obviously read this, but I read it over a decade ago, and you know how sometimes you have to read something twice to make more sense of it, to gain a different perspective, and our perspective sure is different now in 2023 than it was ever before, if you so choose to look into it. And I am doing a little bit of that with a book which I believe is very amusing. We are at chapter 3 here. She was still a child in the first 2 chapters, so let's travel this journey together. Chapter 3. Words and music. The fact that someone as kind and clever as father could be deceived by Lombard convinced me that I must never believe anything until I had proved it for myself. Nurse Vincent was excellent material on which to practice being disobedient, but unfortunately she sometimes gave me orders which I would have been far more comfortable to obey. Unless she had forbidden me to go out in the garden at night, it would have never occurred to me to do so, for I was afraid of the dark. Were there, as she said, things which lurked in the shrubbery, waiting to punish little girls who annoyed their nurses? Could the things creep in through the window and attack me when I was too fast asleep to run away? Would they squeeze between the brass rail at the foot of my bed or slither over them? I thought about the things so much that I had to make myself go out at night and see if they were really there. So I got out of the music room window and made myself walk along the darkest, bushiest path. But the bushes only rustled and never turned into hands that clutched at me, which was a great comfort and a reward for being disobedient. An Irish housemaid said, "The fairies will get you if the moon shines on your face while you are asleep." It was a cosy idea until she enlarged upon the habits of cluricons and pukas. I knew I would hate living underground, and pukas sounded far too large and formless for comfort. So only a strong sense of duty to disobedience drove me to keep myself awake at the full moon, and then draw back the curtains and lie wrapped in an eiderdown on a moonlit patch or floor, trying to go to sleep before the moon's beam moved on, and wondering in what strange company I might wake. "Little girls who tell lies are struck by lightning," said Nurse Vincent, who had been eavesdropping when I had been telling Patrick that I used to be a Red Indian. This was a splendid opportunity to prove my truth. So when the next storm broke, I escaped, naked, into the rain and stood with my arms outstretched to the vivid sky, free and exultant. She got soaked when she had to fetch me in, and the silly woman was terrified of thunderstorms. If I said damn, as father quite often did, she told me that children who use wicked swear words frequently annoy God so much that he strikes them dead. Blast, dash, and damn were my repertoire. But Patrick, when pressed, supplied bloody with a warning that it was not only a bad word, but blasphemy. Patrick's God seemed to be very unreasonable, for why Should he mind anyone singing bloody, which Patrick said meant by Our Lady, when the lady was his mother and very kind. He tried to explain when I asked him, but I still didn't understand, and he said worriedly, "It just is, Miss Joan, but I'd have to be a priest and you a Catholic before we'd know why." It would be very uncomfortable to believe in a God who was so fussy about swearing, but it might be risky to prove that he didn't exist. If Patrick's God did exist and struck me dead, how would he do it? Not by lightning, for that was reserved for liars. But to be on the safe side, I'd better choose a night of friendly stars and clear weather. Would he use a swift blow on the back of the neck with the side of his hand like Patrick used to kill a sick rabbit? A clean, quick death, so it is, he had said. It rained for several days and I was relieved, because I was not really looking forward to having to make sure God didn't mind about swearing. It would have to be a night without clouds so that he could see me. Then one came, so I couldn't put it off any longer. It is surprisingly easy to leave a sleeping house when you don't bother to be especially quiet. I wore my dressing gown and slippers until I got down to the beach. Then I took them off because I felt it would be impolite to ask of God while I was hidden in clothes. The sea was uncovering the sands, gently drawing back smooth sheets of water. "Bloody," I whispered, "bloody." There was no answer except the soft sound of the sea. It was cold and my teeth were beginning to shatter, but I managed to say "bloody" quite clearly and loudly. Still, nothing happened. I looked up at the sky. The stars were so bright that good God could suddenly see me. "Bloody," I shouted, "bloody and blast and damn." Suddenly I felt beautifully happy. I knew that I need not believe what other people told me about God. Nanny Walpole came back a few days later, which was very lucky, as it would have been far worse if Nurse Vincent had still been with me when I broke my leg. It happened when I was on my way to Diana Baddard's 7th birthday party, so it was the 23rd of September, 1911. The back gate, which we always used because the other three were kept bolted, had a lock that could be opened with a key from either side and was of 4-inch iron-studded oak. Running on ahead with the key, I saw that a plank was leaning against the door and covered the keyhole, so I pulled it away, and the door fell on me. The next thing I heard was Patrick's voice shouting for people to help him lift it off me, and him cursing the workmen who had been repairing the door and left it propped only by a plank while they went off to fetch new hinges. I was lying face downwards, with only my head free from the weight that was crushing me into the gravel. The door was so heavy that it took 4 men to lift it. Nanny Walpole was trembling so much I thought she would fall over when she picked me up. "Mother of God, look at her leg," exclaimed Patrick. Nanny Walpole, trying to prove to herself that I was not really hurt, stood me on my legs to see if they were broken. One of them was. There was a sickening feeling, like going down much too fast in a lift, and a crunching noise. Then I fainted. Iris, who was in the Dedans, which was full of people watching father playing an important match, remembers a maid rushing in and shrieking, "Miss Joan is dead. Her back is broke. She's dead." My back was not broken, although a vertebrae between my shoulders had been badly damaged. While they thought I was unconscious, I heard people saying I might be paralyzed. If I cried when my broken leg got cramp, it made father unhappy. So I tried to remember being somebody who was clever at hiding her tears. This was not very successful until in a dream I met a woman whom I used to be fond of long ago. She was a Roman and lived in a white house with a fountain and cypress tree in the garden. Her pain was much worse than mine, and when she could not help crying, she collected her tears in a very beautiful shaped bottle, thin blue glass decked with gold, and sent them to the temple as an offering to a goddess. I collected my tears in a little round medicine bottle, but when it was full, I did not know where to send it, so I kept it on the mantelpiece. The plaster cast was too tight, and when Dr. May took it off, he saw my leg was crooked. So a surgeon came down from London to put it straight again. He brought an X-ray machine with him, which crackled and sent blue sparks across the pitch-dark room. Father held my hand while my leg was being put in the right position, so I felt quite brave, even though it hurt far more than when the gate broke it. There was a nice man staying in the house called Mr. Pisey. He had a flying machine which looked like a bath chair with canvas wings tied on with wires. And as soon as I was well enough for my bed to be pushed onto the balcony, he used to fly past above the sands at low tide to amuse me. Iris read aloud and told me fairy tales, but I began to worry in case I would have to spend years and years in my boring bed. Then I stopped worrying, for Jenny came to see me and promised that I would soon be well. I recognized her the moment she stood beside my bed, although I had not seen her since she died. I asked her whether I should tell Father she was here, but she said it would be better if her visits were our private secret. She never came except when I was alone, so I had to pretend that I could not settle down to sleep while anyone else was in the room. Sometimes she played the piano for me. I knew her music, although I had only heard tiny echoes of it from the cylinders she had made for a kind of gramophone before I was born. It seemed quite natural that I could not see the piano, though I could see her hands, which were very like Jack's and mine, weaving the music from the invisible keys. I always thought of Father as Jack and of Mother as Blanche, while Jenny was with me. I suppose because relationship to her was no longer important. Nanny Walpole went to look after someone's new baby as soon as I no longer had to wear irons. The irons were because my good leg went bandy from putting too much weight on it while I was on crutches. I missed her very much, but I still had Jenny. Chapter 4. Sergeant's Mess. After Nanny Walpole left, I had a series of nursery governesses, none of whom I liked. Mother cannot have liked them either, for none of them stayed more than a few weeks. They must have been lonely at Stecourt, for now I had lunch and tea with my parents, so they ate every meal alone except breakfast and inhabited an uneasy no-man's land between the dining room and the servants' hall. I suppose I ought to have been better company for them, but I infinitely preferred the more fertile pastures beyond the green baize door. Until the 1914 war, the kitchen was ruled by a chef. The first of these was an Alsatian who suffered from an illness which made him see large blue porpoises glaring at him out of the kitchen wall. None of his family knew about this. In the middle of a dinner party, he entered the room in hot pursuit of his kitchen boy, whom he was trying to kill with a cleaver. The guests went to ground under the table, until on the third lap, Mother spoke so sharply to him that he fled, to lock himself in the storeroom, from which he was removed by 3 ambulance men and taken to hospital. He was followed by René, a Parisian to whom I rapidly became devoted. It was beneath the dignity of his high bonnet to cook for the nursery or the servants' hall, but by the time I was 6 I had learned to rejoice at the subtlety of a sauce, to tremble with indignation when the soufflé passed the peak of perfection because of some delay in the dining room. One night he let me come close to his heart when, on my nocturnal prowlings, I found him weeping in front of one of his chefs-d'oeuvres. It was a sculpture in sugar, an enormous cake in the likeness of a tennis court, complete to the net and the chase lines, the tambour and the grill. "She is so beautiful," he whispered over and over. "She is my child, and tomorrow they will stick a knife into her heart and she will be a cake only." It was a solemn thought, and I began to tremble. These were his toys, dearer to him than my teddy bear, for he had made them. The giant salmon, its spine a garden of pimento and tarragon flowers, which I had seen sleeping on its private iceberg in the larder. The capons dressed in smooth white satin sauce, the stained glass window jellies. These too would die. What could I do? I could think of nothing helpful and began to cry, wiping the tears who consoled me. "We must have courage, my little one. We must remember that beauty lives forever in the fond memories of the stomach. Not only the raw materials of his crafts, but people also responded to his Gallic genius. Mother, much as she appreciated his food, often got angry with him. I thought her utterly unreasonable at the time, though now I understand that it was tiresome for her to have to keep on finding new recruits to fill the gaps in the ranks of his minions, whom he despised and bullied until they gave notice. When she descended upon him in wrath, he would rush out of the house, not rooted, but to pick her a bouquet of flowers as a peace offering. It tried her high, for these were always specimen blooms, preferably those being jealously guarded for a flower show. If worse was the kind head gardener who replaced the loathsome Lombard tried to protest, René would fly into a tantrum shouting, "Only the best is good enough for Madame. You do not dare to deny it." If she rejected the flowers, he would sink on his knees and recite her a poem, which unnerved her. Being a little more of a linguist than I am, she could understand only one word in 10, and so she felt at a severe disadvantage. One day I was assisting him to prepare a julienne of vegetables. So kind a man he was that he never let me guess how much I hindered. I stretched out my hand too far across the chopping board, too fast for him to withhold the flashing knife. The top joint of my finger hung by his sinew. I screamed, and the chef fainted. Luckily, Dr. Ballard was staying in the house and did such an excellent repair that I have only a thin white scar on my fourth finger. René took the accident far more hardly than I did, who thoroughly enjoyed suddenly being the centre of attention. Every night when my nursery governess had gone down to her solitary supper, he brought offerings to me: chocolate rabbits stuffed with cream, marzipan birds perched on spun sugar nests, pâtés of crab, rich morsels of duck mousse, banquets in miniature on which I thrived. Some clash of temperament at last sent him away. A clash so loud to be muted by pottery or flower, too loud to be muted by poetry or flowers. I remember only the ache of his absence and mother saying that René left in disgrace. But he came back to visit us during the Kaiser's War, the only man of his regiment to be left alive, having lost a leg and gained the Croix de Guerre. As no one believed me when I told them about the interesting people I had been before I was Joanne, I considered it quite permissible to tell lies when they were necessary to protect my freedom, until my conscience became annoyingly active after a conversation with Worsfold, the gardener. It was strictly forbidden to ride my tricycle past the cucumber frames, but one day I did so and, cornering too fast, fell through the largest one. I was not hurt, nor was the tricycle, so I hastily buried the broken glass and the more obvious damaged leaves in the rubbish heap, and congratulated myself on having efficiently covered my tracks, being unaware that in the soft earth I had overlooked one unmistakable footprint. Challenged by Worsfold, I thoroughly lied. Truth was far too expensive a luxury when the cost would have been to have my tricycle taken away. He led me to the frame and in silence lifted a leaf, making me take off my shoe and fit it into the incriminating evidence. He then took me to the potting shed and solemnly described the rot which would have spread through the entire household because Miss Joan told lies. Patrick would say he had stoked the boilers when he had not done so, and all the melons would get frosted. Tizard would only pretend to water the lettuces and they would die. Carpenter would find it easier to lie than to give sugar to the bees. Why not, if Miss Joan did? And the bees would starve to death instead of making honey. I was so moved that I even offered to own up to Mother, but to my relief he said this was not necessary, as I had already owed up to him. Duncan Wilson, our tennis professional, came into my life when I was 4. He had been christened Duncan because he had paternal and maternal uncle with the same name, and his parents wanted to make sure that neither of them was offended. Long before he started teaching me to play the game, which was not until I was 7, I used to watch him, stringing rackets or recovering tennis balls, 9 dozen to each basket of them, in his room at the end of the court while he talked about tennis. He told me there were grossly ignorant people who confused it with lawn tennis, a very inferior game played outdoors which should be referred to by the well-instructed as pat ball or lawners. It was, of course, our tennis that was the game of kings. Henry V might not have been beaten the French so thoroughly at Agincourt after the Dauphin had started the war by sending him a basket of tennis balls as an insult, unless he had been determined to prove that he could win as easily on the battlefield as he could in the court. Anne Boleyn might have kept her head if she had taken the trouble to appreciate the game. She probably annoyed the king by clapping when he lost the chase, or by forgetting to clap when he put a nice shot into the winning gallery, said Wilson. Perhaps she talked at the wrong moment and put him off his stroke, I said feelingly, for long before I could read I had learned that the notices in the Dedans meant silence is requested when the ball is in play. She did not watch from the Dedans, or Dedans. There was a lot of betting and ribald language among the spectators in those days, so it was not considered suitable for ladies. The king made a window into her apartment for her to watch him from it. It is high in the end wall above the grille in the court he built at Hampton Court Palace. Is this tennis court still there? It is, Miss Joan, and has been played in every year since Henry VIII was champion of England. The sequence of over 400 years remains unbroken, for during the war, although the court was closed, Father and Wilson played a match there each year. Whenever I felt in the mood for a gossip, I only had to go to the laundry, where Mrs. Pink inhabited an echoing cavern of ironing and steam. She was immensely fat, and her welcoming smile displayed gums as smooth and rosy as the best Yorkshire ham, until one day, although taught that it was rude for children to make personal remarks, I exclaimed, "You've got teeth, Miss Pink." She blushed and, whipping the dentures from her mouth, hid them in the pocket of her starched apron. "Tell me, Miss Joan, did I do wrong to take them?" And before I could think of anything to say, she hurried on with her tale, while I perched on the edge of the ironing table. "It was this way, dearie, if you see what I mean. In my spare time I do laying out, which is to wash and tidy up a corpse to make the poor thing look nice to meet its maker. The same kind of thing, only different, as Miss Saunders does make your mother's hair. Kate wouldn't even touch a dead mouse, so I doubted if she would be much use with a dead person, but I was far too interested to argue the point. I was doing this yesterday for a lady," continued Mrs. Pink earnestly. "Real lovely she looked, and suddenly when I came to tie up their jaw you must while they are still warm and put pennies on their eyes, the thought jumped right into my mind. She'll not be wanting those teeth where she's going, and a bit of cotton wool to plump out her cheeks will do her just as well as in her coffin." She stared down at her clasped hands in silence for a minute, large, kind hands, the kind, soft skin and wrinkled with long years of suds, the knuckles gnarled with the weight of wet linen. Then she looked into my eyes. I whipped them out of her mouth and into mine, and then fitted a treat. And they fitted a treat. Is it a sign that I did her no wrong, Miss Joan, that they fitted so well? How could I reassure her? I stared at the ceiling as though searching for inspiration, which I was. "She is very glad, the lady who gave you her teeth," I said firmly. "But are you sure, Miss Joan, that it wasn't stealing? Theft is wicked and a double weight of sin if one dares to steal from the dead." There were tears in her eyes. It was essential to speak with authority. "The lady who gave you her teeth has just been talking to God. 'God,' she said, friendly as anything, 'here am I, safe in heaven, crunching apples as loudly as a horse, and never an apple could I more than mumble unless my dear Mrs. Pink had relieved me of my teeth and left my jaws free for your new ones to grow in. Then there was Sergeant Major Spencer, who gave me boxing lessons. He had been a PT instructor in the Brigade of Guards, and clad in white singlet, which displayed his magnificent torso, he roared at me as though I were a genuine recruit. I found the PT boring, though I would never have admitted it, but then came the glorious moment when he marked out a ring with a piece of chalk on the music room floor, and with a perfect solemnity would maneuver on his knees so that I had a chance of landing a straight left to his jaw. He acted as well as he boxed, and I almost believed him when at the end of our 6 rounds he would talk out of the side of his mouth, saying that his missus would have to give him mince again for supper, as I had knocked all his teeth out loose. He would twirl the needle-sharp points of his waxed moustache and say pontifically, "Miss Joan, don't you ever fight dirty. No putting a penny between your knuckles as so to break the bridge of the other fellow's nose. No hitting below the belt, mind. No rabbit punches." Then with a broad wink he would add, "Never fight dirty, unless it comes in line of duty to teach someone a lesson." While we shared 11s, it was quite easy to imagine that my glass of milk was a second tankard of beer. He recounted magnificent adventures. Sometimes he went blow by blow through triumphs in the ring, and best of all acted the rule of a score of Dutchmen he had taken prisoner in the Boer War, when they attacked him after realizing he was out of ammunition. "Wonderful what you can do with a broken bottle if you're put to it," he would say with relish, and then, being rather inclined to point a morale, would add, "Always provided you've paid proper attention to a nipper to your Indian clubs." I thought swinging Indian clubs was rather hard work, but to please him I swung them higher and wider while he bellowed orders at me until the point of his moustache quivered, and I trembled with effort, and at his praise glowed with pride. It was strictly forbidden to fight with visiting children unless both parties wore boxing gloves, but the taunt, "You're only a girl," sometimes spurred me into action. Even my dear neighbour and exact contemporary, John Mallet, was not exempt from an occasional bout. At 6 we were engaged, and I felt it only fair to convince him that he would have no need to be ashamed of any feminine weakness in his future bride. We were sparring amicably when I knocked out one of his front teeth. In the horror of seeing it lying on the grass, I entirely forgot that children shed their first set of teeth and grew a new lot. I had done something appalling to my darling John. John would have to wear false teeth. I couldn't possibly marry anyone with false teeth. My terror of dentures was ingrained, for a malevolent nurse who came while Nanny Walpole was on holiday used to put her uppers and lowers in a glass beside my bed, arrange a nightlight so that they appeared to have a hellish phosphorescence of their own, and say in sepulchral tones, "If you so much as stir finger or toe while I'm down at my supper, they'll scold you proper. You see if they don't." Remembered fear and present guilt drove me to hide in tears in the potting shed. There John discovered me, not as I expected and would have considered fair, to gloat over the punishment I might expect, but to comfort me. "It was loose anyway," he said, offering a slightly blood-stained handkerchief. "Father told me to tie it to the doorknob and then slam the door, but I kept moving faster than the door, so it didn't work." He displayed the trophy tied in the corner of the handkerchief on which I had just blown. "I'll put it under my pillow tonight, and Mother says a fairy will turn it into a shilling by morning. It's all not about the fairy, of course." He eyed me, but I was too subdued to argue the point, which made him feel sufficiently senior to offer advice. "When your teeth come out, you might get as much as half a crown. They know you believe in fairies." He gave me his 2 shilling the next morning, and I accepted it gratefully, as I needed it to bribe one of the gardeners not to tell Mother that he had caught me climbing a tree. But gratitude gnawed. Would a boy have accepted the money or gone out and won it for himself? First thoughts suggested that as a girl often had to suffer starched drawers and frilly petticoats. The least that boys could do was to offer the resources of their money boxes. I think I would have let it go at that if the current nursery governess had not the curious foible of reading aloud to herself from the Bible during breakfast. I think I'll finish this here because the battery is almost empty. Happy Saturday. No, it's not Saturday, it's Friday.